صل على محمد وآل.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the third night that we mourn the anniversary of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his loyal followers.
محمد وآل محمد صلوات.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ويل لكل همزة لمزة ويل لكل همزة لمزة الذي جمع مالا وعدده يحسب أن ماله أخلده كلا لينبذن في الحطمة وما أدراك ما الحطمة نار الله الموقدة التي تطلع على الأفئدة إنها عليهم مؤصدة في عمد ممددة صدق الله العلي العظيم. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. بسند صحيح عن جابر بن عبد الله الأنصاري عن فاطمة الزهراء عليه السلام بنت رسول الله صلى الله عليه قال سمعت فاطمة أنها قالت دخل علي أبي رسول الله في بعض الأيام فقال السلام عليك يا فاطمة فقلت عليك السلام قال إني أجد في بدني ضعفا فقلت له أعيذك بالله يا أبتاه من الضعف فقال يا فاطمة أويتيني بالكساء اليماني فغديني به وأتيته بالكساء اليماني فغطيته به وسرت أنظر إليه وإذا وجهه يتلألأ كأنه البدر في ليلة تمامه وكماله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. وما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولدي الحسن قد أقبل وقال السلام عليك يا أمه فقلت عليك السلام يا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي فقال يا أمه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جدي رسول الله فقلت نعم إن جدك تحت الكساء فأقبل الحسن نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا جداه يا رسول الله أتأذن لي أن أدخل معك تحت الكساء فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا صاحب حوضي قد أذنت لك فدخل معه تحت الكساء فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولدي الحسين قد أقبل فقال السلام عليك يا أمه وقلت عليك السلام يا ولدي ويا غرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي فقال لي يا أمه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جدي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله فقلت نعم إن جدك وأخاك تحت الكساء فدنا الحسين نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا جداه السلام عليك يا من اختاره الله أتأذن لي أن أكون معكما تحت الكساء فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا شافع أمتي قد أذنت لك فدخل معهما تحت الكساء فأقبل عند ذلك أبو الحسن علي بن أبي طالب وقال السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله فقلت عليك السلام يا أبا الحسن ويا أمير المؤمنين فقال يا فاطمة إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة أخي وابن عمي رسول الله فقلت نعم ها هو مع ولديك تحت الكساء فأقبل علي نحو الكساء فقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء قال له وعليك السلام يا أخي يا وسي وخليفتي وصاحب لواءي قد أذنت لك فدخل علي تحت الكساء ثم أتيت نحو الكساء وقلت السلام عليك يا أبتاه يا رسول الله أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء قال وعليك السلام يا بنتي ويا بضعتي قد أذنت لك فدخلت تحت الكساء فلما اكتملنا جميعا تحت الكساء أخذ أبي رسول الله بطرف الكساء وأومأ بيده اليمنى إلى السماء وقال اللهم إن هؤلاء أهل بيتي وخاصتي وحامتي لحمهم لحمي ودمهم دمي يؤلمني ما يؤلمهم ويحزنني ما يحزنهم أنا حرب لمن حاربهم وسلم لمن صالمهم وعدو لمن عاداهم ومحب لمن أحبهم إنهم مني وأنا منهم فاجعل صلواتك وبركاتك ورحمتك وغفرانك ورضوانك علي وعليهم واذهب عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. فقال الله عز وجل يا ملائكتي ويا سكان سماواتي إني ما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدحية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضيئة ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا في محبة هؤلاء الخمسة الذين هم تحت الكساء. فقال أمين جبرائيل يا رب ومن تحت الكساء؟ فقال عز وجل هم أهل بيت النبوة ومعدن الرسالة هم فاطمة وأبوها وبعلها وبنوها. فقال جبرائيل يا رب أتأذن لي أن أهبط إلى الأرض لأكون معهم سادسا؟ فقال الله نعم قد أذنت لك. فحبت الأمين جبرائيل وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله. العلي الأعلى يقرئك السلام ويخصك بالتحية والإكرام ويقول لك وعزتي وجلالي إني ما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدحية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضيئة ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا لعجلكم ومحبتكم وقد أذن لي أن أدخل معكم فهل تأذن لي يا رسول الله؟ فقال رسول الله وعليك السلام يا أمير وحي الله إنه نعم فقد أذنت لك. فدخل جبرائيل معنا تحت الكساء. فقال لأبي إن الله قد أوحى إليكم يقول إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. فقال علي لأبي يا رسول الله أخبرني ما لجلوسنا هذا الفضل عند الله. فقال النبي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني بالرسالة النجية، ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض، وفيه جمع من شيعتنا ومحبينا، إلا ونزلت عليهم الرحمة وحفت بهم الملائكة واستغفرت لهم إلى أن يتفرقوا. فقال علي إذن والله فزنا وفاز شيعتنا ورب الكعبة. فقال النبي ثانيا يا علي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني بالرجال واصطفاني بالرسالة النجية، ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل الأرض، وفيه جمع من شيعتنا ومحبينا، وفيهم محموم إلا وفرج الله حمه، ولا مغموم إلا وكشف الله غمه، ولا طالب حاجة إلا وقضى الله حاجته حاجته. فقال علي إذا والله فزنا وسعدنا، وكذلك شيعتنا فازوا وسعدوا في الدنيا والآخرة ورب الكعبة.
محمد على محمد بلندتر صلوات. بلندتر صلوات.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm going to read a small extract from a book published by Muhammadi Trust, Sayings and Wisdoms. This is from a section called Family of the Prophet. Muhammad says, look to the family of your Prophet and behave like them, and follow in their footsteps. They will never make you leave guidance, and they will never lead you back to destruction. If they remain in a place, then remain there with them. And if they set out, then set out with them. Do not overtake them and get lost, and do not fall behind them and perish. No one from this Muslim community, this Ummah, can compare with the family of Muhammad. May Allah bless him and his family. And no one on whom similar blessings have been bestowed will ever be their equal. This is from Sahifa Sajadiyah, Imam Zainul alayhi salam, and this is Dua al-Yawm al-Arba, supplication for Wednesday. In the name of God, the All-Merciful, the All-Compassionate, praise belongs to God, who appointed the night to be a garment, and sleep for a rest, and day he appointed for a rising. To thee belongs praise, for thou roused me from my sleep, and hadst thou willed, thou wouldst have made it everlasting, and an everlasting praise that will never be cut off, and whose number the creatures will never count. O God, to thee belongs praise, for thou created, then proportioned, ordained and decreed, gave death and bestowed life, made sick and healed, made well and afflicted, sat upon the throne and encompassed the kingdom. I supplicate thee with the supplication of one whose mediation is weak, whose stratagems have been cut off, whose term has drawn near, whose expectation from this world has shrunk, whose neediness for thy mercy has intensified, whose remorse for his neglect has come great, whose slips and stumbles have become many, and whose repentance is devoted sincerely to thy face. So bless Muhammad, the seal of the prophets, and his household, the good, the pure. Provide me with the intercession of Muhammad. God bless him and his household, and deprive me not of his companionship. Surely thou art the most merciful of the merciful. O God, decree for me on Wednesday 4 things. Induce me to be strong in obedience to thee, to be joyful in worshipping thee, to be desirous of thy reward, and to abstain from that which would make incumbent upon me thy painful punishment. Thou art gentle to whom thou wilt. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
Muhammad Ali Muhammad Balantar Salawat. Bari digar Balantar Salawat. برای خوشنودی فاطمه الزهرا سلام الله علیها بلندتر صلوات.
मर्दों मिलकर बुलंद आवाज से जरूर भेजें। हो ए चश्मे पुरा अच्छी तरह हक से लेना है अगर अजरे सवाब अच्छी तरह माइले गिरिया हो चश्मे पुरा अच्छी तरह और साकिया मैं हूँ अज़ल से मैं कशे में गदीर साकिया मैं हूँ अज़ल से मैं कशे में गदीर भर दे अब मेरे लिए जामे शराब अच्छी तरह माइले गिरिया हो चश्मे पुरा अच्छी तरह और बैरपुर से क्या है ये तकरार है मुनकिर नकीर बैरपुर से क्या है ये तकरार है मुनकिर नकीर हूँ गुलामे मुर्तज़ा दूंगा जवाब अच्छी तरह माइले गिरिया हो चश्मे पुरा अच्छी तरह और खाक होकर भी दरे मौला पे पहुंचूंगा जरूर खाक होकर भी दरे मौला पे पहुंचूंगा जरूर ए ज़मीन कर ले मेरे मट्टी खराब अच्छी तरह माइले गिरिया हो फातिहा बखुदा दिल से फिदाए शहे अबरार था बखुदा दिल से फिदाए शहे अबरार था दिल बरे अहमद मुख्तार का गमखार था नफ्स मगलूब हुआ जिससे वो जर्रार था साहिबे जुर्रत व हिम्मत का वफादार था मालो दर छोड़ दिया जाने नबी की खातिर जख्म भी खाए हुसैन इब्न अली की खातिर खाए नारा के शहे यशरब बतहा मददे लो गुलाम आप पे कुर्बा हुआ आका मददे राहते जाने नबी दिल बर जहरा मददे, दम निकलने को है फख्र मसीहा मददे, वक्त आखिर मुझे दीदार दिखाओ मौला, नज़र का वक्त है यासीन सुनाओ मौला। हुर को रोते हुए रंग में शह अबरार आए, शह के साथ अकबर अब्बास अलमदार आए, बाबरे बख्त के मौला पे दीदार आए, अपने मेहमा पे करीबों को न क्यों प्यार आए, पाए दी अकबरो अब्बासे दिलावर बैठे, शाह आगोश में सर लेके जमीन पर बैठे, अर्ज की हुरने के एक पीर भी हैं हद से मलूम, बोले शबीर ये तौकीर हुई तुझको हसूद, पेशवाई को तेरी आए जन्नत से रसूल, अर्ज की हुरने में कुर्बान हुए जाने बतूल, कोई बीबी है कि वो अर्श फिशा होती है, शह ने फरमाया कि भाई मेरी माँ रोती है, बखुदा दिल से राए।
पर मोहम्मद आले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु बारे दीगर बोलकर सल्लल्लाहु
सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि या रसूल अल्लाह व अहल बैतिकल मज़लूमीन, सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि या अबा अब्दुल्लाह व अलल वाहिलती हल्लत बिफनाइक, عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله لاخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين، ويا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. اللهم صل على Earlier today I was reminded of a very famous hadith which I'm sure you're all familiar with, but it's always worth repeating and reminding ourselves of it. It's a hadith which is recorded in the Musnad of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And what's interesting about the hadith is it's a dream of the Prophet. And as we know that amongst all Muslims, if you see a dream of the Prophet, it is true. There is no doubting the veracity. You see the Prophet in your dream, you have seen the Prophet in your dream. And this is reported from Ibn Abbas, the cousin of Imam Hussein, and of course famously the person who was asking the Imam when he was leaving for Karbala, for Iraq, why are you going? Maybe you shouldn't go, maybe you shouldn't take the women with you. So he was a friend, but he was also someone who was a bit hesitant about the actions the Imam was taking. So Ibn Abbas narrates in this hadith that he had a dream and he saw the Prophet, and the Prophet was disheveled. He had dust on his hair, his clothes were disheveled, and he was carrying in a container some blood. And Ibn Abbas, famously was worried, and he said, Ya Rasulullah, what is this in this container? And he said that it is the blood of Hussein and his followers. And I have spent the whole day gathering the blood from the plains of Karbala into this container. Note, he said, it's the blood of Hussein and his followers, not just the blood of Hussein. And Ibn Abbas then says, and later when I reflected upon it, I realized that was the day of Ashra, the day on which Hussein was killed. So one thing this tells you is, what impact did this have on the Prophet? Leaving aside what we already know about the Prophet mourning the Imam before he was even born, or as he was born, this is also as it was happening. Because as I said, the dream of the Prophet is real, it is true. And of course we believe the Prophet's presence is not something which ends with his passing from this earthly life. As I said, zikr is something which makes present. The status that the Prophet and the Imams have is one where they can always be present. It is just for us to want that to happen and to desire it, to desire their presence. They are always there for their followers. And it also gives you a sense of the fact that the blood, of course, of the Imam is sacred, but it is also the blood of his followers. His followers who are not infallible, who are not from the family of the Prophet. They have a certain status and excellence and fazilat which we cannot even begin to understand. And that is why when we come to recount their Messiah, we do so because they have a certain precedence that needs to be considered as well. So that is a very famous hadith, and it's always important to remember. One other thing another narration I want to just mention before we resume our discussion on presence is another very famous one. Now, of course, we know that in these days, a lot of people want to actually be in Karbala for Ashura. People are going, people will have gone even today to Ashura. And increasingly, the gathering in Ashura is becoming bigger and bigger. And we know from our texts that the ziyarah to the Imam on Ashura has a greatness which cannot be compared. For example, it's often said that it's greater than 70 Hajj or 70,000 Hajj or whatever. Now this is not to belittle Hajj, but it's to give the importance of what it means to be in Karbala on the day of Ashura. But we also have the fact, and I've been trying to say this, that presence works across space and time. We can be with the Imam in Karbala, and that has its reward and its excellence and its own experience. But we can be with the Imam and his followers wherever we are. And we know this from a very famous hadith from Imam Baqir alayhi salam. Who it's always important to remember was actually at Karbala. We sometimes forget. He was one of those children who was scared, who was running from tent to tent in the evening of Ashura. And he says that it's important, you should mark the azab, you should mourn Hussein. You should weep for him. You should instruct the members of your household to weep for him. You should establish azan in gatherings, in places, and you should demonstrate your lamentation and your grief. You should cry out, you should weep. You should do this openly. And people should meet each other in this state, meet and gather in these ceremonies, in this azan, this lamentation, and they should offer condolences and console each other over the calamities that befell the Imam. And we know, of course, the way in which we do this is that when we meet each other, we say, "Adam Allah ajurana wa ajurukum, bimusabina bi Abi Abdullah al-Hussein." May God make greater our reward and your reward for what we feel about the musibah of Hussein. And this is, of course, always enjoined throughout this period, but especially on the day of Ashra. So, regardless of whether we're in Karbala or whether we're not in Karbala, it's the same process of memory, of making present the Imam and his story, the narrative about what happened. So I want to continue our conversation about what walaya is in the light of presence, and continue discussing this famous hadith, Ma'rifat al-Insan, Ma'rifat al-Imam al-Nuraniya, the understanding or the experience of the Imam, knowing him in the heart through his luminous nature. But let me just say one thing quickly about walaya, and I don't like to get involved in polemics, but just to kind of mention briefly that, of course, another term for walaya which is often used, which is more common in theological language, is imama, or is khilafa. And, you know, for centuries this issue has been debated amongst different kinds of Muslims. What is perhaps increasingly quite peculiar about the modern period is this suddenly strange position, which is that imama is just a political issue. It's a political squabble. It has no theological or religious significance. It's purely political. It's purely about organizing leadership and power and governance. So there's a distinction being made between politics as such and the sphere of religion or the sphere of theology. And as I was saying yesterday already, this is one of the many binaries of the modern period which are problematic, because it assumes a certain idea about what religion is, and it assumes a certain idea about what politics is, that the two are quite distinct and different. Now we know historically this is just not the case. When we read the old polemics, you pick up a work, say, 700-800 years ago, no one says that the question of imama is purely a question of politics. No one says this. It just doesn't happen. What they say is that the question of imama is the question of who decides in matters of faith after the Prophet. How do we decide these questions of the deen after the Prophet? And for many people in the pre-modern period, including those who are not Shia, the term they often used for this was walaya, and they understood that walaya meant the question of who was the insan kamil, who was the perfect human after the Prophet, who took the place of the Prophet as insan kamil. This is a very important point. This is, historically, we know that this idea of a squabble based on politics just does not hold any water. It's a completely misleading idea, which is very much about changing our understanding of what the deen is into something which is very simply transactional. You know, it's basically the Prophet came, he has a very limited role, and he gave you certain rules, and now we just need someone to kind of administer and control those. And that's just not the way in which the early Muslim community looked at these things. The message of the Prophet, the person of the Prophet, was a miracle for those people. it astonished them, it astounded them. When they encountered the Prophet, it was their lives were changed. When they encountered Amir al-Mu'mineen, their lives were changed. This is not something you get from someone who's merely a political leader. It makes no sense to make that sort of argument. And in fact, amongst Sufis, when they talk about walaya, it's very clear. Walaya is a certain status of existence. It's a state of being, which is about representing, manifesting, making present the divine names. And it's about complicating this relationship between Nabuwa and what comes after. So if you take this kind of modern political idea, well, we have prophecy and it kind of ends, and after that you have kind of this administrative role, and you can call that an imam or whatever. That is just not the way they see it. They understand that the role of walaya is that it represents the very heart of prophecy. It represents the culmination of the very idea of prophecy. This is why the very famous Andalusian Sufi, Ibn Arabi, in a very famous passage in his Futuhat Makkiyah, one of his major works, the Meccan Revelations, he says about Amir al-Mu'mineen, and interestingly, he always, when he mentions the name of Amir al-Mu'mineen, he does something which is unusual. He uses the phrase Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, which is not part of either the Sunni tradition or the Shia tradition. But it gives you a sense of how he sees him. And he says this person was the closest. As a nafs, he was the closest to the Prophet. But not only was he the closest to the Prophet, he was Sir al-Anbiya. He was a secret of all the prophets. And this is an indication to a very famous hadith which is found in Sufi texts and in our texts, which is, that when Amir al-Mu'mineen says, I was sent, openly with the final prophet, but I was present, sirran, secretly with all the prophets. And I'll come back to this because this emerges in this particular hadith. I was with all the prophets. I was with Jesus, I was with Noah, I was with Musa, etc., etc. And of course he was, because one of the things we know is that the light of the Prophet and Amir al-Mu'mineen is the first existence. That is a very clear position in our tradition, and it's not just in our tradition, it's found in many others as well. So, to continue, and particularly on this is the point I stopped yesterday in this particular hadith of the understanding, acknowledgement of the Imam through his luminous nature. Amir al-Mu'mineen continues, and he says, I and the Prophet were a single light from the light of God. And God commanded that light to split. And when it split in perfect halves, it split into perfect halves. And then he says, this is why the Prophet said, Ali is from me and I am from him.
Wow.
So this is the notion of the nafs, and this is the notion of the intimacy of the two. And then he goes on and discusses a number of relationships and complementarities between the Prophet and him. And this relates particularly to phrases which come up in the Quran. And it kind of also addresses this whole issue of people always talk about the name of the Prophet doesn't really come up in the Quran apart from one or two places. The name of Amir al-Mu'mineen doesn't come up in the Quran, so what's going on here? So what he's actually showing is that you don't have to be named using this specific given name, but rather that naming, that making present of the Prophet and Amir al-Mu'mineen is throughout the Quran. And so he gives you some examples. And he says, again, he's addressing Abu Dhar and Salman, who were his closest companions. And he says, continue on this. So that one light, as I said, divided up into two. One became Muhammad al-Mustafa, and the other one became his wasi, Ali al-Murtada. So he's talking about what's happening. The first one became the natiq, the one who announces, the one who presents a sharia, who gives a message. And the other one became the samit, the one who's silent. And that requires a whole kind of explanation. I don't want to go into it right now, but this is basically indicating the idea that one is a prophet and the other one is the wali and the wasi. The second thing he says is that the prophet became the munzir, the warner, and I became the hadi, the guide. And he says, and this is a reference to the famous Quranic phrase from Surah Al-Ra'd, إِنَّمَا أَنْتَ مُنذِرٌ وَلِكُلِّ قَوْمٍ هَادٍ. Right? So there's that's complementarity between the warner, so the one who gives the message, brings the message, and then the guide, as I mentioned yesterday, the one who then takes you on that path to your destination. And he continues with this and says, and the Prophet became Sahib al-Jam, the one who brought the totality of everything. And I became Sahib al-Nashr, to spreading out everything. Right? So he brought everything. He brought the revelation, but it was my job to spread it. It was my job to spread it. And interestingly then he says, and the Prophet became the Sahib al-Jannah, the owner, the person of paradise. And I became Sahib al-Nar. So indicating that Amir al-Mu'mineen, one of his roles is kind of to decide who goes to hellfire, who is deserving of that punishment. And then he continues with various other phrases, coming back again to the Quranic one. So he says, the Prophet became Yasin, and became Nun wal-Qalam, and became Taha, right? And all of these things. So the Prophet had these phrases. He became the Sahib al-Dalalat. He became the one who was presenting these proofs. He was presenting himself as a proof of God. And I became Sahib al-Mu'jizat wal-Ayat. I was the one who did miraculous things and presented the signs of God to people beyond that and extended. He became the Khatam al-Nabiyyin, and I became Khatam al-Wasiyin. Right? So, you have these very interesting kind of indications that he's saying, look, this is not just something it's not just from I've made it up. This is what the Quran is telling you. And I'm just explaining it to you because you haven't been told what this actually means. As we know from before that, the Prophet famously said to Amir al-Mu'mineen that, I have been charged with the tanzeel, with the revelation, and your job is with the ta'wil. Your job is the explanation of what is going on here. And then he continues with the interesting things. He says more about what he is in the Quran, what Amir al-Mu'mineen is in the Quran. So he says, Ana Salat al-Mustaqim. I am the straight path in the Fatiha. I am An-Naba al-Azim, the great news, which is given in Surah An-Naba. And he continues with other things. The Prophet had a mission. He was Sahib al-Da'wah. I am Sahib al-Sayf. He was calling people. I was fighting for the faith. And there are many further ones of these sorts of explanations where he continues this conversation, the Prophet was this, I am this. This is the complementarity. In so far as he's showing that the presence of the Prophet then continues with this sort of presence. And they both come from the same light, which is split equally. And they are both ever present in the Quran. And their presence in the Quran is just for someone who then really has the ability to understand these things. What the term he used earlier is mustabsir, the one whose eyes are really open, can see what is going on here. And one of the fundamental issues, this is really about walaya and presence, and one of the key issues, one of the key elements of walaya is the miraculous knowledge of the Imam, the ilm of the Imam. And so, he says things like, I know what's going to happen. I know what's in your dreams. I have been given the ability to speak in a miraculous manner. These are all related to ilm. And one of the reasons why ilm is so important is because ilm has a direct relationship with existence. Ilm is about grasping what can be known, and what can be known has to exist. So there's an intimate relationship between knowledge and existence in that way. So if you're saying that the Imam has miraculous kind of perfect knowledge which is divinely ordained, then that means in a sense that the Imam knows the totality of existence. And so it's not very difficult to then say that the Imam's walaya covers the totality of existence. That's, the Imam's walaya covers the totality of existence. The Imam can do whatever they want with the existence, because they know that, because they're given that status. And as I said, this is very much that authority they have over space and time. And then he continues with these very famous statements, which comes back to what I mentioned before about Amir al-Mu'mineen as the secret of the prophets. And so he says, and he always uses the phrase by the command of my Lord, or by the permission of my Lord. And so he says, I was the one who carried Noah in the ark and saved Noah by the command of my Lord. I was the one who took Yunus out of the belly of the whale and saved him from that by the permission of my Lord. I was the one who, saved Moses when he was crossing the sea by the command of my Lord. I was the one who took Abraham out of the fire by the command of my Lord. And so forth. I mean, these statements are very important because they're indicating this idea of, what Amir al-Mu'mineen is as Sidr al-Anbiya. But it's also, he's always saying by the command of my Lord. He's not making any statement about divinity. That's really important. He said that before, he said, I am a creature of God. Don't ascribe rububiyyah, don't say that I am a Rabb. But do you have any sense of what my limits are? And he's indicating that my limits are far beyond what you might conceive of. I'm not confined by that space and time in any way whatsoever. And this idea of the timelessness is quite important. And the ever-presentness of it as well. There's one phrase which he uses which I think is really important for us, but it is already there when he's saying this. And he says, and the us used here can be in two senses. It could be us as Ahlul Bayt, and it could also be us as those who are the true kind of believers of the Ahlul Bayt and the Prophet. He says, Our dead do not die. Our dead do not die, and our absent are never absent. Which means that if you conceive of us as dead, then this is not true, we're not dead. And if you think that we are absent, we're not absent, we are present. This is a very important thing. And those of us who are killed, they're not really killed because we're still present. Right? So you see us, you think you have done this to us, but you can't possibly do this. This is the reality. Because even if you kill us and you think we are dead and you think we're wiped out and we're not. What did Sayyidina Zainab famously say? "Lan tamhu dhikrana." You can never eradicate our dhikr. She said that in the court of Yazid, you can never eradicate our dhikr because we will always be present. You think you've killed us, you think you've destroyed us, you've made us absent, you've made us dead, but no, this is not what we are. This is not our reality.
برای خوشنودی سلام الله علیه بلندتر صلوات.
And he continues with the famous associations with the other prophets, where he says, I give life and I kill and I give death by the order of my Lord, and so forth. I know what is in your minds and your hearts. So, the zamayat qulubukum. I know what's in what's going on, what you're thinking. This again relates to the miraculous knowledge that the Imam has. So, as I said, there's a lot more in this very long hadith, but just to recap, it's really about saying that the knowledge of the Imam, and the knowledge of the Imam's presence and the walaya of the Imam is something which is central. It defines a believer. It defines how a believer engages with their own existence and the world around them, and it defines the way in which the believer really understands and opens up what the Quran is. Insofar as the Quran is divine speech which is opening up reality, right? And to really appreciate that reality, you need to understand what's actually going on there. It's not just about the words as you see them, but what do they actually mean? What are they trying to convey? And I want to just finish the hadith with, in a sense, the conclusion of it, which recaps a number of these things. And he says that God made us, جعلنا معصومين مطهرين. He made us ma'asum, preserved, and He made us pure. And He privileged us over all the believers, all creatures who are believers. And He uses this very interesting phrase which we always use, and that's why we say, Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana li hadha ma kunna linahtadi lawla an hadana Allah wa haqqat kalimatuna. Yeah, okay. So this very famous phrase, where we say, and praises God who guided us to this, and without which we would not have been guided to it. He's talking about this reality of Him, but He's also teaching that to His closest followers. And then He continues and says, and finally says, this is understanding me, ma'rifatun bin nuraniyah, by my luminous nature. Fatamassak biha rashidan. So cleave to it, attach yourself to it. This is what you need to do. Because not one of you, not one of my Shia will ever reach the level of true insight, istibsar, of having your vision completely clear, until you recognize me in my Nuraniyah, in my luminous nature. And so it's about your recognition is also will open your eyes to what reality is. It will open your eyes to who I am, but it will also open your eyes to what reality is and to deal with the reality of this world, of the entirety of existence and the destination to which you are going. And it will open up seas of knowledge for you. It will open up seas of knowledge where you can progress, further and further deeper into it. So, brings back again the idea of what is a true mu'min, is one who has that kind of ma'rifah of the Imam. Ma'rifah is related to the question of knowledge, and it has depth, and it's about opening up your vision. It's about how you perceive life. It's about how you actually understand and appreciate presence. Because we often do not appreciate presence. We often miss presence. And we forget what presence is. It's a reminder to us. This is why dhikr is important and how dhikr is related to presence, is because it's reminding us sometimes we have this propensity to forget. We have a propensity to get caught up in other things. We forget the presence of the divine. We forget the presence of the Ahlul Bayt because we're, attached to our work, to our studies, to exams, to this or that. We just sometimes lose track. And what the Imam is saying, no, root yourself back through this understanding, through this luminosity, because always recognizing the presence of the divine and the presence of the face of the divine will allow you to really make sense of what's going on around you and will help you through this life. It will obviously help you in the afterlife, but success in this life is also attached to that. But it's not success which is defined by any kind of material means. We're not talking about, the Imam saying do this and you'll become rich and famous and have status and so forth and be successful in the material sense. He's saying you'll be successful because you will actually be able to see what reality is. You will have that sort of vision. And it's precisely that sort of vision which a lot of people want. Everyone's asking this question, what is the meaning of life? What is it all about? What's really going on around us? People often ask this question. It comes down to this question precisely of vision and needing the Imam to open your eyes. Right? Needing the Imam to, that the encounter with the Imam, as I said, is so astonishing, so life-changing that your eyes opened. Now, of course, we have many examples of this, but perhaps one of the biggest and best examples of eyes being opened is Hur, this famous soldier from Kufa, who is generally quite a nice person, but doesn't really know what's going on. We know that he is sent by Ibn Ziyad to obstruct the Imam's journey towards Kufa. And we have the famous recounting of the Imam and his followers are in the desert, and one of his followers says, and they're actually getting quite thirsty. And one of the followers say, it's good, I can see some palm trees in the distance. I can see the palm swaying in the distance. Which is good because that means there'll be water there. And then as it comes closer, and then someone says, no, these are actually lances, they're spears, and there are flags coming to us. And of course, Hur and his men arrive. And they've been on a fast journey from Kufa, so they're extremely thirsty. And so we know what the Imam does. The Imam, in whichever context he is the Imam, he has to be hospitable. And so he says, these men are thirsty, take out all your water skins and give it to them. Take them all out. make sure even their horses are quenched. And you have the famous case of the young man who is in Khor's army, and he's almost fainting. And when the water skin is given to him, he doesn't know what to do. He can't even hold it properly. So the Imam goes to him and says, let me help you. And he puts out his hand and he puts out the water so that he can drink. This is the idea of the Imam as someone who is Kareem, whose presence is there. And there are many things which happen. You know, one of the famous things which is often said is that the Imam says, it's time for prayer, you pray, we can pray. Allah says, no, I will pray behind you, you're the grandson of the Prophet. So even though his eyes are not opened, he's getting there, the interaction is working. And then when the Imam afterwards starts to leave, Khur stops him and grabs the reins of his horse. And the Imam famously says, may your mother sit in mourning for you. And you know, Khur says, if there was anyone else who had said that about mother, I would have said something about your mother, but I cannot say anything about the daughter of the Prophet. And so they continue together. And we know even later, when Khur is then back he's rejoined in Karbala with Ibn Sa'd, he's still very disturbed about this, because the encounter with the Imam has begun to open his eyes. And so in the morning, very early in Ashra, he goes around asking people, are you definitely going to fight this person? And when they say yes, he says, well, I cannot do this. So he takes his son and his companion, and he says to them, tie my hands and take me as a prisoner to the Imam's camp. And they go to the camp, and he comes as a prisoner. The Imam says, of course, why are you like this? You are my guest. But the problem is, I cannot really give you proper hospitality. I have nothing here. I have barely any water here that I can give you. So I cannot give you proper hospitality. And then, of course, Khur famously says, let me be one of the first to sacrifice myself, but I want to send my son first. So he sends his son, and his son fights valiantly and falls from the horse, and he calls out for his father. And Khur is about to go to the field, and the Imam stops him and says, Khur, it is not for a father to see his son in this way. Let me go to your son. You cannot do, a father cannot bear to carry the body of his dead son. And then we know even later when Khur himself goes and he fights valiantly, and when he falls, the Imam comes immediately to him. And he's bleeding profusely from his head. And so he says to the Imam, he says, please let me be able to see you. Can you do something about the blood? And so the Imam famously takes out a handkerchief which used to belong to his mother, and he ties that handkerchief around the head of Khur so that Khur can see the Imam. His eyes are fully opened by this time, and he sees the Imam as he leaves this world. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب كانوا ينقلبون. Well said.
चांद मुहर्रम की तू बदली में चला जा, ऐ चांद मुहर्रम की तू बदली में चला जा, ऐ चांद मुहर्रम के तू बदली में चला जा। के मर जाए ना, तुझे देख के मर जाए ना, हो बीमार है सुगरा ए चांद मुहर्रम के तू बदली में चला जा, ए चांद मुहर्रम के तू बदली में चला जा, ए चांद मुहर्रम के तू बदली में चला जा। घर सहारा का लुटने की खबर तूने सुनाई, तुझे देख के रोती है मुहर्रम में खुदाई। 1400 बरस बीते, 1400 बरस बीते, वो सब करते हैं शिकवा, ए चांद मुहर्रम के तू बदली में चला जा, ए चांद मुहर्रम के तू बदली में चला जा। मिलने के लिए भाई को बेचैन बड़ी है, कब से अली अकबर की वो राहों में खड़ी है। बिछड़ी है ये मुद्दत से, बिछड़ी है ये मुद्दत से, इसे तू ना नजर आए, चांद मुहर्रम के तू बदली में चला जा, ए चांद मुहर्रम के तू बदली में चला जा, ए चांद मुहर्रम के तू बदली में चला जा। ओ वीरान घरों में न इसे नींद है आती, अकबर की जुदाई है इसे खून रुलाती। कदमों के निशान ढाप के, कदमों के निशान ढाप के बैठी है सरे राह, ए चांद मुहर्रम के तू बदली में चला जा, ए चांद मुहर्रम के तू बदली में चला जा, ए चांद मुहर्रम के तू बदली में चला जा। भैया की जुदाई में परेशानी है रहती, हर रोज ये नाना को रो रो के कहती। अकबर ना मिला नाना, अकबर ना मिला नाना, मैं मर जाऊंगी तन्हा, ए चांद मुहर्रम के तू बदली में चला जा, ए चांद मुहर्रम के तू बदली में चला जा, ए चांद मुहर्रम के तू बदली में चला जा। वादा जो किया बहन को सीने से लगा के, मैं शादी करूंगा तो तेरे पास ही आके, मैं साथ मुहर्रम को, मैं साथ मुहर्रम को लौटूंगा ना घबराए, चांद मुहर्रम करबला न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे। भूल जाएंगे हर गम, भूल जाएंगे हर गम, गम तेरा न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे। कैसे भूल जाए मक्तले हुसैन को, कैसे भूल जाए फातिमा के बहन को, बाखुदा न भूलेंगे, बाखुदा न भूलेंगे, गम तेरा न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे। वो सितम वो जुल्म वो जफा के सिलसिले, अलकमा के सामने खयाम जल गए, नैनवा न भूलेंगे, नैनवा न भूलेंगे, गम तेरा न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे। जिस जगह हुसैन का जवा हुआ शहीद, जिस जगह हुआ था एक बेज़बां शहीद, वो जगह न भूलेंगे, वो जगह न भूलेंगे, गम तेरा न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे। वो लहू भरा अलम व मश्क खून भरी, इंतजार आब में सकीना मर गई, सानेहा न भूलेंगे, सानेहा न भूलेंगे, गम तेरा न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे। खून रोए जिसके गम में उम्र भर इमाम, ले गई थी लूट के रिदा जो फौज शाम, वो रिदा न भूलेंगे, वो रिदा न भूलेंगे, हम तेरा न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे। अस्सलाम करबला की खाक, अस्सलाम, अस्सलाम दफन जिस्म पाक, अस्सलाम, ये सदा न भूलेंगे, ये सदा न भूलेंगे, हम तेरा न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे। भूल जाएंगे हर गम, भूल जाएंगे हर गम, गम तेरा न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे, करबला न भूलेंगे। गाँव से, 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 गाँव से।
Assalamu alaikum ya Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum ya Nabi Allah. Assalamu alaikum ya Khatam al-Nabiyyin wa Sayyid al-Mursaleen. Assalamu alaikum wa ala ibnatika Fatimah al-Zahra, Sayyidat al-Nisa al-Alameen. السلام عليك وعلى وصيك وخليفتك أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب. السلام عليك وعلى ولديك الحسن والحسين سيدا شباب أهل الجنة. السلام عليكم وعلى تسعة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين. السلام عليك يا مولانا يا صاحب الزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا قاطع البرهان. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. السلام عليك وعلى آبائك الطيبين وأجدادك الطاهرين المعصومين ورحمة الله وبركاته.